We all have this inner unique essence that we're here to transmit beyond just what we do or say. We're literally here to embody it. It's something that other people also want to receive. Our particular wounds around expression, what we feel like we're not allowed to be, what we feel like we're not allowed to say, those particular wounds are actually a really important part of our authentic expression. It's actually the portal and the doorway into that place. You're creating something authentic, you're putting yourself out into the world and you're creating something real, like you're gonna freak out probably multiple times. Normalize that because it's a part of the initiation. And then it comes up when we go, oh, perfect, right on time.
Welcome back to Returns Weird. I'm your host, Jessa. Today, we're talking with Talitha Ferri. She is a teacher, vocal awakening, and somatic facilitator, songkeeper, and vocalist. She developed the vocal awakening method, which combines intuitive channeling and somatic trauma integration. She supports people in liberating their authentic voice and stepping into their soul path and deepest expression. I found Talitha a few years back on YouTube. She puts out some really beautiful light language, so definitely check out if you get a chance. And she's been a supportive presence for me as I've been creating this podcast, and I'm so grateful for her. Enjoy this episode. It's going to be a really good one. What does weird mean to you?
This phase in my life, weird to me is about expression and allowing who we are and how we experience ourselves internally to be authentically expressed, not in a curated or controlled way, but in an intuitive way, in a playful way, in the way that we do when we're children, right? The way children just are so organically expressed and honestly like so weird the majority of the time, right? Because there's not this filter between sort of what they're feeling or what they're currently exploring or experiencing and how that's making its way out into the world. And so for me, weird is about sort of returning to that innocence and that sort of original blueprint of expression and even reclaiming the weirdness about it, not needing to sort of lose that or even have to normalize that expression, but actually like letting it be weird, accepting that other people think it's weird, accepting that it might trigger a reaction in another person, and accepting that that's sort of part of it, so not necessarily trying to hide from the actual discomfort that can come up when we are just unmasked, being ourselves, singing, playing, channeling, exploring, and allowing it to bring up reactions on ourselves, reactions in others, and really like learning to create a space where we can feel the weirdness, which isn't always fun. Like weirdness isn't always this enjoyable thing. Sometimes it is a moment of discomfort, of meeting an edge that we didn't know we had within ourselves or with another person. And like creating a space relationally to be with that and to explore like what this thing is together, and not try to avoid it, in the way we avoid conflict, the way we avoid anything that feels like it could disrupt our sense of self or how someone else perceives us or our relationship to another, but to actually build our capacity, I guess, to be with those moments. And that doesn't mean like learning to be super comfortable with it and confident with it. Actually learning to be with the vulnerability and the sort of unknown quality of really authentic expression, in the sense that you don't always know what's going to happen or what you're going to say or how you're going to be when you really allow yourself to be sort of unmasked with another person or with a group of people. So yeah, that's weird for me right now.
I love that answer. And you touched on so many threads that I'm sure we're going to get into as we dive deeper into your work and your way of connecting with weird, which is the voice. So you've been guiding people into deeper expression and embodiment through their voice for years now. So for somebody new to this work, what do you want people to know about their voice?
Yeah, to me, the voice is this space where so much of who you are internally and so much of how you experience yourself, even in ways that you can't quite put into words, right? That is sort of beyond what your intellectual mind can define. It's this place where we can actually express that and where we can transmit this very personal, intimate, inner experience out into the world, and allow another person to receive it, to hear it, to feel it. Um, and also, just when we consider how controlled, we are in the way that we're not even intentionally raised, right? I think it's less intentional than it is, sort of like a malicious act on the part of any, like, caregivers, right? But we are sort of unconsciously raised to repress our expression and to control, how we communicate ourselves to others. And so I would also say that it's so normal to have a challenging relationship to your voice, to not like the sound of your voice, to feel very limited in how you express yourself, like when you're actually in the room with another person, like face to face in interaction. And when we just can like create space for understanding that it's actually the most normal thing in the world, considering the environments that we were raised in, to have a very difficult time feeling like who we really are is being communicated to others and actually being received by others. I think it gives us a little bit of grace, and it normalizes an experience that I think we can sometimes not really know how to address or approach. But ultimately, I will say like that's also a part of it. It's a part of it to feel disconnected from our voice. It's a part of it to feel like we even might have lost who we are through the voice, meaning we lost the ability to just be ourselves and express ourselves authentically. And it's a part of the journey of reclaiming it. And the particular experiences that we have, our particular wounds around expression, what we feel like we're not allowed to be, what we feel like we're not allowed to say, what we feel like people are going to judge about us, how we feel we might be rejected, like those particular wounds are actually a really important part of our authentic expression. And it's actually the portal and the doorway into that place. And so there's no degree of relational or expression oriented wounding that sort of keeps you from reclaiming your voice. It's actually the pathway to it, right? And it's sort of the doorway that we walk through to access what authentic expression means for us personally.
Mm. Yeah. Can we talk a little more about that disconnection
Mm.
with the voice? So, how do you know if somebody is disconnected from their voice? Like, how would they know if they're not fully embodying it? How does that manifest?
Yeah, I think there are the more conscious experiences that a lot of us relate to, like feeling like when we're around a person or a group of people, like feeling like we can't quite get the words out that we want to express, or like there's only certain parts of ourselves that are allowed to be. Sort of the way like you have friend groups where you're like, this is who I am here and this is who I am here. And when I'm with my family, I'm like this. And acknowledging that that's normal enough to sort of like come into resonance with the social groups that we're in, but recognizing where it's actually a limitation that we can't move past and where there's actually fear, I think ultimately. And this is where like some of this is conscious and some of this is unconscious. It depends on how aware you are of sort of those deeper layers of experience. And sometimes we can go years like not being authentically expressed, and it's not a problem for us, and that's also okay. Like we can go for years feeling like this is enough, this is good enough, I'm getting what I need from people, right? And then we can maybe have some point in our lives where we recognize that there's something deeper that's not being fulfilled. So it can come up in very visceral moments like social anxiety, or feeling like we can't set a boundary or can't speak any truth if it's not convenient to other people, or just can't be our authentic selves and share the quote unquote weirder parts of ourselves or more creative parts of ourselves. It can show up in the way we censor our creativity and what we share online. Or it can show up in this deeper way that can be a little bit harder to pinpoint, which is sort of this feeling of coming to a moment where you recognize that like who you understand yourself to be on a deeper level is not being felt in the world. And that's like way trickier to sort of talk about because it's so subjective, right? But this sense of like that who you experience yourself to be like beyond your human ego and identity, um, other people don't get to see that. And that's really what all of this is about for me, right? Like, that's really what the work that I do is ultimately about. Like, yes, I love working with relational trauma and, repatterning and reorganizing the way we relate to communication with others and creating safety in ourselves so that we can express ourselves freely without fearing the worst. But really the heart of my work is around, like, this idea that you actually can transmit and communicate who and what you are beyond your human story out into the world. Um, and that's, like, literally an experience we can have, and that there's such a deep fulfillment that comes from it.
How would you define that? Like, how can we say that simply? Being felt for who you really are. Like, is that purpose? I don't know. That's what's coming up for me right now. Is it purpose? Is it just total authenticity? Is it soul led expression?
So I would say what I'm speaking about is, like, the feminine aspect of this. If we're talking about the being, right? So the masculine aspect would be like the doing, what you're actually doing. What does your work look like? Right? So for me, it would look like the vocal awakening work that I do, right? And the teaching and training that I do, like what you're actually doing and how that's manifesting. But in respect to this conversation, I would say it's the feminine aspect. It's very, like, hard to quantify and measure. It's very qualitative in the sense that it is literally the embodied feeling and experience that the thing that you are, right? And this is a hard thing to touch because we have varying levels of relationship with that. I'm an introverted feeler. Like, my whole life is oriented around, like, my sense of inner experience, right? That's why I do this work. We don't all have that maybe heightened degree of internal connection, though we can certainly develop it, right? So I would say it's this very subjective experience that who you are beyond a human ego, the sort of essence of you, the spirit of you, that unique thing, energy, signature that is you, is actually transmitted through your very being, not just through the voice, but through the body, right? Through the energy field. And the feeling, again, which is hard to measure, that other people see it and feel it too and receive it and reflect it back to you. And it's this very elusive sort of experience that I sought so much of my life. That's why, partially why I think I was so driven to create and make music and share that, was this feeling that there is a way to take this inner experience and transmit it in a way that doesn't dilute it, right? The way
Hmm.
it might if you just explain it in just words, right? That doesn't dilute it and actually allows a person to get on the wavelength of it, to get on the frequency with it, and to not understand it, but experience it in the body and sort of touch that energy and that magic. And yeah, I believe we all have that. We all have this inner unique essence that we're here to transmit beyond just what we do or say. It's like we're literally here to embody it energetically and create a capacity within ourselves to feel it and then to share it and be it. And that it's something that other people also want to receive. And it's where really deep connection comes from, when we feel like we can share this transmission and receive one another in this really deep, sort of elusive way that we actually can never really fully speak to in
Hmm.
words.
Yeah, I like that. And we can't really receive someone if they're not being who they are. And you touched on the feminine, and as you were exploring the disconnect with the voice, I was thinking of people pleasing, right? Because you mentioned kind of like being a chameleon in
Mhm.
with certain people or in different environments, which, like, it's fine, that adaptation, right? But when it's coming from fear or people pleasing because you're afraid to
Mhm.
say what you really think or be who you are, people can't actually receive you. And then you're left feeling empty, right? You're
Mhm.
left feeling like nobody really knows me. And
Mhm.
it can be lonely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and highly intelligent. I mean, I think that's just, like, a really important piece to recognize around it. We can start to hate that part of ourselves, especially if we do it chronically. We can just be like, "Oh man, if I could just not do this," right? But it's highly intelligent and you do it for a reason, and most likely there were some pretty essential experiences in childhood where you learned, this is how I create safety in my body in relationship to others. This is who I have to be for people to like me. And your body is just, it's so programmed for survival. And so I think rather than just trying to shift that or fix it or change it, because it's not something we can really transform from the outside, we sort of have to work it from the inside out, actually meeting that core patterning that's creating it. But I think the first step to even addressing that is recognizing the intelligence of it and recognizing that it's just a part of you that does it, right? I know you're a big fan of parts work and,
Mhm.
IFS stuff,
Mhm.
and I think that perspective is like so helpful to recognize that like, oh, I don't fawn. I don't people
Mhm.
please. A part of me does. A part of me learned that this is what we do to survive. And so this part takes over and takes care of me in these moments. And learning to
Mhm.
see intelligent and learning to actually love it and appreciate it and recognize that like there's a part of me needing to do this and what could I do to start creating safety for this part rather
Mhm.
than just like change myself from the outside, right? Which becomes super, super frustrating because it's really challenging to do, if not impossible.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, of course, you bringing this, vocal awakening facilitation training, but then the vocal awakening method to the world, you've been disconnected from your voice,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm curious what your journey has been like with that. I know you've been through some, trauma, sexual trauma, and it sounds like the voice was your way back into your true self and your way of healing. Is there anything you wanna share on that?
Yeah. So I was really, really shy my whole life. And I still sort of actually understand myself or identify a little bit as shy, even though maybe that's not true anymore. Like I was so, so shy. I'm very introverted naturally. And I could not figure out how to even remotely communicate myself to people. There was like this huge barrier to what I was experiencing and then what that looked like to share it with another person. And so for most of my childhood and adolescence, I never had a fulfilling moment of feeling like who I was shared in any way. I just sort of had developed characters sort of that I was with certain people. Not to say that my relationships were not authentic. I had close friendships, right? But like there was only so much of me that got to exist. And it wasn't until I started making music when I was 14 I started writing songs and around 16 I started like playing in cafes and gigging around town and stuff. And that was the first time I actually had the experience of my inner world and who I actually understand myself to be being shared with people and people receiving it and people recognizing it, even if they couldn't put into words, actually feeling that moment where people received it and like saw me, right? I would say that was like that's been like a really big theme of my life is like actually being seen and spending so much of my life like unable to reveal myself in any way. So that moment with music and writing songs and sharing them and singing them was really where I started to access that space. And from there, pursued music, ended up moving towards more intuitive, sort of ceremonial sound in music, which is where the vocal awakening came from. But voice was definitely the pathway. I think I recognized that for the type of really like pure expression transmission that I was seeking, that had to come through creativity. It had to come through something nonlinear. That I could sit here all day and try to express who I am, right? And I like do love to do that, right? I mean, I absolutely adore like even attempting to do that. But I recognize that the only way I can truly transmit who I am in a way that someone can actually experience and receive and have that moment of fulfillment is through art, is through sound, is through creativity, and it's through an expression that's nonlinear, right? And is transmitting so much more than like sort of information, right? Or like linear information like our thing.
Yeah. What's coming up for me as you're speaking is the felt sense, right? So would you agree with this that the felt sense is the only way to really be like experienced because you're being felt.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's
It's
definitely orientation.
like it completely bypasses the rational logical mind. And that ties into feminine, the right brain
Yeah.
and creativity.
Yeah, and when we consider too that, so much of how we understand each other is projection, right? Like
Mhm.
think of other people based on what we think about ourselves and our past experiences and our perspectives on reality, right? That when we're relating through the mind and through just understanding, like sort of from a cognitive place, cerebral place, like we're more likely to base our relationships in projection than we are in something authentic. And I think that felt sense that you're speaking to is where we bypass that mental function and filter and actually get to be with one another beyond what we think or what stories or preconceived ideas we might have.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. And I think that's why art and music, it's just medicine. It's so powerful. You don't even need to understand who the artist is because you just feel them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's universal. I mean, we've always done it and we'll always do it. I mean, there's nothing I don't think ever that could shift our culture enough to
Yeah.
disconnect from pursuing creative expression.
So, how do we tap in to that creative expression through the voice? I should have asked you to sing. I should have asked you, I was just thinking about that. Like, I should have asked you to channel some sound codes. I love your sound codes on YouTube.
Yeah, I would say like there's a lot of ways to access it. I think what's really important is to be connected to the unique way that you experience energy, that you experience yourself, right? Like what does that feel like for you? Because we're all so different, right? It's such an internal subjective experience. So I would say it's just important to be able to feel yourself, right? And like create space and time in your life to be with yourself. And for some of us that's easier, right, than it is for others, right? And some of us might actually have a sort of experience in life that has caused us to like seek safety by not being with ourselves, right? So I will name like it's much harder for some than it is for others, but recognizing like how you operate, how do you experience feeling? How do you experience like energy and inspiration and like what does that feel like for you internally? And from that place, it's just leaning into what is already there. I'm not a fan of like binary language where we're like, I can do this, I can. I'm creative, I'm not creative, right? Rather, it's recognizing it's all there all the time. And the practice is to recognize how it's there for you personally, right? Even if it's like a 1% of something super, super subtle, and learn how to lean into that and recognize that and lose that binary language of, well, I just can't or I'm not, or that sort of not enoughness that can come up. And from there, you're feeding the spark, you're feeding that spark into a flame. And it is a process of learning. Nobody can do it for us. We can certainly be supported and taught and guided, but it is a process of essentially, I think, learning yourself and learning the language that your I don't know, that your soul and your spirit speaks and how life and spirit and God, whatever you want to call it, speaks through you.
Mhm. How do we know if we're disconnected from that? Right. So
Mm.
if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I'm not really sure if I'm feeling myself, if I'm really connecting with that felt sense or my body. Maybe they're trying to figure out if, where they're at in their nervous system and how that relates to the voice, which is probably a good question too, like how trauma and our nervous system impacts our relationship with our voice.
Yeah. I mean, I would say just having the desire, like if you recognize that you want to deepen in your expression, you want to know yourself more intimately, that's really the most important piece. We're all on the spectrum. We're all somewhere, right? There's nobody who is or isn't. Um,
Mhm.
and as long as you have that desire, that's a piece that's coming to you, right? Like, because there's so much that we can be working on, there's so much that we can be healing and developing. And so, to be with where the desire really is at, I would say is the most important. Is the desire there to feel like there's some way you could express yourself more authentically? Is the desire there to be felt by others and to feel like who you are is recognized or felt and experienced in some way? Is the desire there to know yourself more intimately? Um, and then to recognize that even if you feel like you can't and you're not there yet, to recognize where you already are, even in these, I would say like 1% is such a helpful orientation. Like when we allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to have something just 1%, because 1% is like so tiny, then we go, oh shit, well, yeah, I do have like 1% of that, right? Actually, yeah, it's more like 10% or 20%, right? I would say that is such a helpful orientation because it's so difficult to create a transformation from within this construct of I'm not, I can't. That's why that binary language I think can just like trip us up. It can be helpful to get us to the place where we're ready to begin to do the work, but at some point we have to let go of it.
Mhm.
And that 1%, like you wouldn't even be interested in this if you weren't already there 1%, if not, right? And then learn to be with what is already there and learn to recognize and affirm that first and watch how that grows. Because ultimately, what you're doing is you're creating a relationship to yourself. You're creating a relationship to you the way you would with a person. And that requires presence and it requires listening and it requires actually like response, right? So the way that we feel something arise in us and we actually acknowledge it and respond to it, right? And create this sort of feedback loop, this information loop, right? Is super important. And I don't think a lot of us learn that because parts of ourselves are ignored or not fully acknowledged or responded to by those around us because they simply don't know how, especially in childhood. We actually don't learn how to respond to and affirm and acknowledge and relate to those parts of ourselves, right? It's like it can come up, but we don't really know what to do with it. And so we learn to ignore it. And so that practice of actually relating to that 1% or 10%, whatever it is, as if it's
Mhm.
a being, acknowledging it with that degree of respect and reverence is so healing because it's a part of you that probably never got that recognition and never got to develop. And so is almost living in like a vacuum where it's not, there's no mirror, there's no one to see it, there's no one to reflect it. And when you put a mirror in front of it, not only
Mhm.
does it that part and develop that function, but it's so healing. It's so healing for the part of you that has been waiting to be recognized.
Mhm. So I'm hearing, and let me know if this aligns with what you're saying, to lean into the desire, like 1%. Just lean in. And what came up for me as you were saying that, I heard someone say this, I can't remember who it was, but it's like if you just make one shift, like a 1% shift, if you're sailing and you just like shift it just a bit, you're going to end up somewhere entirely different, right? Leaning in that 1% is not a small thing over time.
Yeah, I love that. The sailboat. That's such a good analogy. And yeah, I think it's where a lot of transformation happens. I think we can get really attached to the big transformation, to that big s- sort of like spectacle of a shift that we can seek and maybe see a lot on the internet and the world around us. I feel like that's what we need to have. And I'll say, like, that's also a thing that happens and it's beautiful, but it happens because it's almost like a compounding of all those little shifts and the ability and willingness to be with something, even when it's very small, right? Which is really, to me, I think it's like in a deeper sense, it's almost like a self worth, self love thing to be like, I will celebrate and be with and recognize this tiny 1% shift as enough, right? Rather than needing it to be bigger or more spectacular or whatever, like whatever I think I need it to be. Because what I'm actually devoted to and prioritizing is myself, like this beautiful being that I'm on this journey with, rather than getting caught up in the idea of where we think we need to be or what we think we need, which can understandably be a challenge, right? If where we're at is causing suffering, right? But ultimately, I think that shift of remembering like what is actually the priority here? It's like me. It's this being who is healing and growing and evolving, and they deserve to do it in the way that's actually natural and what they actually need and what can actually be digested as well, right? I mean, the thing with 1% shifts is they're so digestible. Degradation
Mhm.
happens through that, right? And then it allows us the capacity to really make profound transformational shifts, right? But from a place of actually being able to digest and integrate it.
Yeah. Yeah, so the nervous system, you need to have capacity in your nervous system to hold that shift. 1% is, like you said, digestible, but anything more. So what happens when it's too much for the nervous system? Like, how do you know if you're exceeding your capacity to be with the expansion? And by the way, I just want to say, I have so much gratitude for you for holding space for me going through this whole podcast experience in your 2 month container, because what I learned is this, right? Like that the nervous system, and I come from a somatic background, like as a therapist, but it's oriented towards trauma and healing the nervous system, right? So we don't really focus on the expansion of the nervous system. So I wasn't even coming from this framework of understanding that you need to build your nervous system capacity to hold what it is that you're wanting to create. And so when you start to create something and you don't have that capacity, you can feel like a lot of fear comes up. Oh, I can't do this. I'm not ready. And I lived in that place for years. And then I came across you and you were talking about this. And I was like, oh my God, how did I not know this? And it freed me. So, really, really, so much gratitude for you.
It's such an honor, and this is such a beautiful creation. I'm so honored to be a part of it.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, the nervous system piece. I think one piece that is important is we do have to be in some degree of relationship with our bodies and nervous system to know what it looks like when we're out of titration, right? When we're beyond our capacity. Um, and if you're not, you can actually just be living in that state and have it very, very normalized. So it is helpful to get a sense of like what is it like for you when you're a little bit stressed or a little overwhelmed, right? What is it like for you when you become ungrounded and you're sort of like, I don't know, plugging a bunch of holes and managing more than you actually can truly handle? How do you relate to yourself emotionally? How do you relate to your body? Like, what does it actually look like when you're not in balance to be able to recognize when that comes up? Um, yeah. And then the other piece is what you shared around recognizing that when we choose to create something, whether it's a creative expression or a piece of art or a podcast, or whether it's like a transformation that we're seeking to integrate in our life, it's big. Like, doesn't matter what it is, it's huge. And it's so much bigger than what the thing is at the surface level. And it's actually a version of ourselves that we're creating, the version of ourselves that can hold it. And that version, is sort of maybe accessing deeper levels of self-connection or sovereignty or power or confidence or authority, right? And probably has integrated some degree of fear and resistance and maybe trauma and disconnection, whatever it might be. So recognizing that whatever you're seeking to create or whatever transformation you're seeking to create is also a version of you, and that version of you who's on the other side of that has gone through a process, right? That probably involves like needing some fear and some discomfort and some I can't do this and all of the
Mhm.
limit stuff, right? And that's a part of it. And you want the creation, but you also want that version of you. And you also want, on some level, even though it can be hard, the discomfort that comes up as part of the initiation, right? On some level, we are seeking that. We know that it's a part of being human to meet those aspects of ourselves. So I think recognizing that is really important, because if we go into it without that, we can get blindsided, right? Which I think happens all the time with creative pursuits, particularly because we don't connect it to the nervous system and we go to create something and then we can't hold it. And what happens very often is we start creating something and then we throw it out, or we get it created and then we scrap it, or we stall and we don't touch it for a while. And then we start to make it mean something about who we are creatively. We start to make it personal, right? When in reality, it's like, no, you just don't have the support and resourcing. Like, you
Mhm.
just were not literally in the right internal and external environment to hold this, right? And so we like remove the personal meaning making that we love to do about everything. Like, I guess I'm not cut out for this, or like, I can't do it, right? And we actually our awareness towards like what was actually missing here that would have helped you have the capacity to handle this, and going into any pursuit with the awareness that like there's a version of me that I'm creating in this, and that probably involves me facing some difficult experiences or feelings and meeting a lot of bullshit and meeting a lot of
Mhm.
resistance, right? And then finding some gold nugget like within all of it. When we can approach it like we're going into a journey or an initiation, I think it brings us into the right headspace. We're sort of emotionally and mentally prepared for that to come up. So when it does, we don't make it mean anything, which I think is a big piece, is like, you're going to freak out. You're creating something authentic. You're putting yourself out into the world and you're creating something real. Like, you're going to freak out probably multiple times. Right.
Mhm.
And we normalize that because it's a part of the initiation. And then it comes up and we go, "Oh, perfect. Right on time, right? I'm making progress. I'm moving something." But if we're not prepared for any of that and that comes up, we go, "Oh, I'm not supposed to do this. This is a sign. I can't handle it." Da da da, whatever it is. So I think the main piece is you have to come in with an awareness of like what it is you were getting yourself into, and normalize that like all of those fears and discomforts and pieces that come up are part of it, even if that includes you not being able to hold it. because that's also
Mhm.
experience to have is like learning what you can hold. We don't learn capacity growing up. We don't learn how to manage our capacity. And for those of us who are very sensitive, we actually have a wounded relationship with our capacity, meaning we're walking around with the story that, like, I can't handle this, I can't handle this, it's too much because we were not supported to manage and really tend to our capacity. And so part of all of this is learning how to do that. And sometimes we have to learn by going too far, by overdoing it, right? And not making it mean anything personal about us, because literally everybody who does this, anyone who does anything like this is going through this experience as well, right? And learning what does it look like for me to tend to these needs. And I would say really helpful is like, what did I need as a child that I didn't get around capacity? Like, how was my capacity not supported? How was my capacity overlooked? Like, what experiences have I had in the past around capacity, being able to handle something, manage something where I was under-resourced? And what if I started exploring what it could look like to address that and tend to that? And from that place, um, even just addressing a past experience, like that ripples out into the present moment because this is where a lot of trauma actually lies, right? The trauma of not getting what you needed. And now you carry this story that you just don't get to have it, right? And it becomes a self-worth thing. It becomes a pattern that we enact on ourselves. So I mean, wow, there's so many pieces to it, right? There's so many pieces, but I would say starting out with just the awareness that like when you set out to create a vision or a transformational experience for yourself or change something in your life, like to just understand how big it is and to give yourself so much grace and also to like celebrate yourself for doing something of that magnitude and letting yourself like face what's hard and not make it mean anything, and be prepared for like the initiation that comes from something like that.
Yeah. It is an identity shift, like truly at the core, right? Building
Yeah.
our capacity is shifting into a whole entire new identity, which is the only way that we can actually bring something new into the world, right? Something that we want to create and then therefore experience an entirely different version of reality, right?
Yeah,
Because
no.
if we're just staying the same, then we're just experiencing the same thing every single day. And that's probably a really disempowering place to be, but that's what we have capacity for. It's like, I think about this often. If you want to know where you're at in life, just look at your life. It's a mirror. It's like, where are you at in your capacity for like community, connection, creativity, like expansion? Like, look at all the areas in your life and see how you feel about where you're at, because that's a mirror of your nervous system capacity, of what you can hold. And
Yeah.
obviously, having this conversation, we have to be sensitive to the systems of oppression, because there are people that aren't able to, because they're in survival. So when you don't have food, or, and I'm sure, well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know who's listening to this. They could, some people are living in survival, whether they are struggling to put food into their bodies or whatever it is. It makes it hard to focus on shifting your identity and leaning into expansion, because when you're in survival, you can't expand.
Yeah.
So there is
Yeah.
a level of privilege to be able to do this kind of work and focus on expansion and creativity, and not everybody has that, or is in a place that they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and if there's something really important about recognizing where you do have that privilege and harnessing it
Mhm.
and recognizing like what I mean, survival is such an interesting concept because there's actual like survival as in your life you are just barely surviving and then there's the internal state of survival that we all have
Mhm.
sort of integrating. And a lot of what we're talking about is learning to come out of that state of survival and recognize that like I am safe. I am safe and I can calibrate right to this level of safety. And this is where a lot of the nervous system stuff comes in. I mean, so much of like quote unquote nervous system regulation, I think, is like learning to recognize that you're safe and actually communicate that into the body and nervous system. And yeah, I really believe that if you actually have that privilege of not being in a true like literal survival circumstance, then there I don't know, there's this duty to like recognize that and harness it and recognize that you actually have the privilege of creating a life that is out of survival, that is beyond survival, and that when you do that, you can also be a part of, creating a new collective experience, right? Where we can also do more for our survival beyond our personal survival and do more for our
Mhm.
collective thrival, if that's a word.
Thrival.
Thrival
I
from
like that.
school.
S- Something that I had to reconcile within myself is like, I don't need to be in survival mode. Because there was this like guilt, I guess, of like there's so many people suffering in the world, and if I'm just focusing on my own expansion, that feels really selfish. And then I had to kind of look at that and be like, well, actually no, because what is that doing? Who am I serving if I'm just in survival mode and I do have the capacity to not be? I do have the privilege and the resources to not be. Why am I not focusing all of my attention and energy on, you know, my expansion so that I can serve the collective, right?
Mm,
I think
yeah.
that's the only way that we can serve the collective is if we are expanding.
Yeah. I think of like being in the plane and like the plane's gonna crash or the plane's in turbulence and the masks drop and like you put your oxygen mask on yourself first before you
Yeah.
put it on somebody else, right? And it's so easy to I think guilt and shame is such a big piece that we hold in general, and it's just a part of also our human experience, and recognizing that privilege is like having something that somebody else doesn't have. It's a super complex thing in that there's a lot of forms of it. But I think that piece around the privilege of being able to focus on your personal growth and spiritual evolution and healing is a really important one to recognize and to do it consciously, like you're saying, from this place of like I'm not just focusing on my growth like because that's interesting. I'm recognizing that I actually am able to step out of a paradigm of survival and create something new, and to I think connect that into something greater, because I think most of us who are pursuing some deeper level of self-realization or spiritual or personal evolution, I think most of us connect that to something that's beyond ourselves, a purpose, a mission that serves beyond our personal, gain. And it's a tricky thing to find how that sort of like what do I want to say here? It's a tricky thing to, I guess, balance acknowledging, right,
Mhm.
others, but also recognizing where you can be of true service. And
Mhm.
I really believe that like we are of service when we are, first of all, able to sustain ourselves, right, and not pouring from an empty cup. But to me, I think harnessing the privilege of personal evolution is a really big piece. We talk about like checking your privilege. Like I think we can easily confuse that with like disregard your privilege or devalue your privilege, like sort of dishonor it or sort of critique it or be ashamed of it, when really it's like you have something that someone else in the world doesn't have. And how would they use this opportunity? Like, how would they honor having something like,
Mhm. Y-
another like so many forms of privilege. I think a lot about how like a unique form of privilege that I had growing up is like that I had parents who were super supportive of my creativity, like artists who really supported my creativity. And it's so interesting in all of the people I've met in my life to realize like what an insane privilege that is, because most people
Mhm.
that. And when you grow up with that, you just have a connection to creativity like that's so much more easeful. Like, it's not to say like I didn't have to go through self-worth and whatever stuff around that, but I don't think I had to go through the journey that a lot of people do. I've just always had a sense of like that I'm creative, and I've always trusted my creative expression. And that is an absolute privilege to have. The privilege of like being raised in a, I don't know, like a healthy home environment, right? Like there's so many forms of privilege, and recognizing where we've been blessed with something and that we're allowed to have that. And like also now that I can accept that this is a blessing, like how will I use this blessing, and how will I plant this blessing as a seed so that I can grow into something greater? So let me honor my creativity every day. Let me serve and support others in accessing their creativity, because I had this privilege that so many people don't have, which has allowed me to maybe develop this in a way more easily than someone else might have, right? And so I think the same goes for our self-developmental privilege is like make use of it. Make
Mm,
use of let it be something bigger than you without getting lost in the martyr thing either, which can be easy to do. We can do the sort of polarity of either I'm just focusing on me and my development, which is still survival, FYI. If you like are only fixated on your development and like anything else is like a disruption to it, that's still a survival state. It's like, don't take my loaves of bread, right?
mhm,
So we can do that, or we can do the other extreme, which is like, I'm a martyr. I will like suffer in solidarity, right? I will stay in suffering, right? To feel like I'm a part of something. I would say it's this paradox where we find that space in between where we actually are deeply serving our vision and our personal development and we're rooting it into something greater and creating something that is for more than just ourselves.
mhm. Yeah, I love that, and I guess that balance will look different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
We have
maybe.
to our role in it. Oh,
Yeah.
it looks different for everyone. And that's again a connection to self and a connection to who are you and like what is your role in the world and what does it look like when you're connected to that,
Yeah.
but also when you're truly not in a state of survival because it's very difficult to know your role if you're in that state because survival isn't just like am I going to live, am I going to die, am I going to have food, am I going to have money. Survival is also relational. So another state of relational survival that we're actually in, which is very strong in our culture today, is like will I be accepted, will I be canceled, will I be rejected, will I be ridiculed, right? And that our relational survival is so strong for a lot of us. And I think for those of us who are not in like true physical survival state, we're running with the relational survival. We're like, can I post this on social media or will I be like, hunted down, quote unquote, and, killed for it, right? Will I,
Mhm,
will I be made fun of for it? Will I be rejected for it? Um, so I think recognizing that like that state can keep us disconnected from what we truly desire, especially relational survival, because we end up choosing things that we think other people want us to choose, or we think we're supposed to choose, or we think, this person does it, so I should too. It's so complex the story of,
mhm,
and we're in parts of it much more than we are others.
mhm. Yeah, and that need to belong, right? That relational survival, it can feel like though if you're afraid of being rejected and not belonging that you're going to die. Like it can feel so severe. I always bring this back to the witch wound cuz and this is and I can't say this as if it's like a fact, obviously, because I don't know, I haven't talked to enough men who feel like this, but I'm sure, of course, there are. But I'm biased as a therapist that works with women and being a woman myself and having this personal experience. But it seems like it's women are just really have this relational fear, right? This fear of not belonging and being accepted. And it just feels like that dominates women more than it does men. And maybe I don't know. That's just how that's been my experience. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's probably true in some ways, or maybe women just experience it in a different way. I mean, women are definitely more prone to the people pleasing and the fawning and, you know,
Yeah, because 'cause we're
finding also,
relational beings,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
and we also mirror the earth, right? Because we're cyclical.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely important to recognize that there's a unique experience for men and women around this,
Mhm.
that there's like an area we maybe cross over and can relate to one another. And then there's maybe like a unique experience that comes up around it. But this is why the survival thing is such a tricky topic because from a nervous system perspective, like your body doesn't care about if you're actually in physical survival or not. It's just living in the moment and experience. And so we can look at the world around us and go like, "Oh, well, you're actually like fine." Like you're actually not in literal survival, right? But we can be so deeply steeped in a survival state around our relationships. Um and for the body, for the nervous system, that's survival. It doesn't care.
Right, exactly.
No? And so it's such a nuanced thing, I think, actually. It's like one of those things I think you could just, like, talk about forever and ever, right? Is, like, learning to and I think this is where the nervous system sort of quote unquote regulation piece comes in, because it is learning. Coming into your body is literally learning to recognize that you are safe. This is why somatics, I think, is so essential in all of this, because your body doesn't know the difference between, someone potentially rejecting you or being chased by a bear or not having food, to survive the winter. But part of somatic embodiment and learning how to not just be in our body, but actually be in our environment. I think this is something we don't talk about enough in somatics. We just talk about being in our body, but we don't always talk about part of being in your body is being in your environment and being able to know where you are, recognize that you're physically safe. For someone like myself who's super sensitive and can leave my body very easily, like the biggest piece around somatic embodiment for me has actually been being in my environment, right? And this is where this piece comes in to actually, we have to actually teach our bodies, because no one taught us this growing up. Our parents certainly didn't learn about it, and their parents didn't either. It's like teaching our bodies that, like, to be fully where we are and recognize it as safe. Like, that's such a big piece. And this is what I feel like you were referring to earlier, like that there are people who are actually in survival and they're doing exactly what they need to do. They're recognizing that they're not safe, that they're not in a safe environment, and they're going into threat response and they're in survival. And that's like highly intelligent. And then there's those of us who have the privilege of taking the time to learn and teach our bodies this is actually safe. And hey, that person who like did a mean comment on your Instagram post is actually not threatening your well-being, and can you learn to recognize that you are like literally safe in this moment, right? But until you learn how to make that connection, survival is just survival, and it's very hard to differentiate what is real survival and what is sort of internalized survival.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because I feel like that's going to hit. So I want to talk about your vocal awakening method
Mm.
and what that is and how that led you into the facilitator training that you recently launched, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I developed vocal awakening like 4 or 5 years ago, 5 years ago probably, and it just came through my own relationship with my voice. I'd been making music for years, and I kinda got to a place where I felt like I had to just deconstruct everything that I knew. I'd been writing songs and performing, and I really wanted to meet my voice and just sound as intimately as possible. And so I sort of tossed everything aside and spent maybe about a year or so in just personal mentorship with my voice, with my channel, just with sound, like on this really, really sort of like minute, like intimate level. And through that developed vocal awakening, and it was super organic, and then I started sharing it with my community and doing sessions here and there online. And with those sessions with other people, it started to sort of develop. So it's something that was very much developed through co-creation with clients, recognizing like what people were bringing to me and what was coming up in each unique session. And so it developed into this sort of multidimensional method, in that I sort of call it a somatic channeling method, right, through the voice. And so there's aspects of like somatic trauma integration, right, and recognizing specifically the emphasis on relational and interpersonal trauma and how that will naturally affect the way we use our voice, or rather our voice will organize itself around those traumas. But it's also very much rooted in like channeling as a concept, right? Being able to bring information in through the channel, through the voice, information from the earth, from the plants, from the stars, right? And that sort of much more woo-woo side of things. Um, there's a lot of elements of shamanic like journeying, so like inner world travel and really exploring the internal landscape with the voice. And then it's also just, intuitive singing and just creative expression and learning how to use the voice intuitively and sing intuitively and let the voice sort of lead you in the moment, from a more improvisational perspective. And it sort of depends on who I'm working with. I mean, I don't do sessions anymore, which is why I'm training facilitators. But it sort of opens up uniquely in relationship to who is being guided through the method. But yeah, I just opened my first cohort for the training, so I'm now currently training facilitators and supporting them to set up a brand and business so that they can actually not just learn how to facilitate this method and support people, but actually support themselves and get started on the right foot, building a foundation, an offer and just more clarity around who they're here to serve and come into real right relationship and integrity with their mission and purpose.
I love that. So, what kind of person would be called to this facilitation training? Are they already into the voice? Like maybe they channel through their voice, or like
Mm.
codes they sing, or maybe
Yeah.
not. Maybe they're just somatic in orientation.
Yeah, I would say anybody who has a personal relationship with their voice. Some of them are actual vocalists and musicians and singer-songwriters.
Mm.
Some might not call themselves singers, right? That's a question I get a lot, like, "Do you have to be a singer to do this?" I would say anyone who has a deep relationship to the voice and to sound and to singing and song and is deeply moved by it and knows they wanna be a part of other people's vocal expression, knows they want to support people in liberating their voice, and of course, obviously wanna do it themselves because I'll say like, we don't have to be perfect coming into this work to facilitate. We don't have to be perfectly embodied and open in our voice or whatever concept we might have. Like part of the work is that it opens us and nothing teaches you like teaching others. So yeah, people who have a deep relationship with voice and sound and know they want to midwife, a movement of vocal liberation. And to also, my people tend to be like they do their own thing. They have a very strong sort of independence in that they like to do things their own way. They sort of march to their own beat. They maybe don't connect to a lot of like approaches when it comes to business. And so that has felt very foreign and challenging for them. But they know that they want to have a career in facilitation and that they want to have a career in their form of service, whatever that looks like for them, whatever they end up making of the vocal awakening, because this is very much not a copy and paste training, meaning like people coming into this program, they're making it their own. I've sort of decided to give this modality away and allow it to be continued in its development and refinement. So it's very much for people who they're not looking for a copy and paste, they're not looking for a formula. They're creative, they're intuitive, they want to do it their own way, but they also want the guidance and support and are wanting to take this method but also make it their own and trust themselves in doing that and to cultivate a brand and practice that is deeply personal and not sort of strategy. I mean, there is some strategy that we need in all of this, right? But not overly formula driven.
Mm, great. So, if somebody's interested, how can they learn more about this or just learn more about your work?
Yeah, so my website, kumi.earth, Qumi.earth, is where you can find all this information. I have a facilitator training page, and there is an option there to book a connection call and chat with me. I also do event launches like every 3 months or so, where I do like a 2-day free event. It's 3 hours each on both days. It's super, super intensive. I give away as much as I possibly can, and I like to yeah, I like to focus the event on sort of supporting people to get started and addressing a lot of the fears and doubts that come up when we're like, can I actually do this? And address a lot of the patterns that we can be in and we cannot really be fully aware of that can keep us sort of stuck essentially in the waiting room of like, I want to do this, but later when I'm ready, when I'm ready. So it's really about coming out of the waiting room and stepping into being a facilitator. Yeah, I like to cover, I sort of call it like it's like this idea of when you decide to step into facilitation and like really go all in, it's like you sign this contract and there's all this fine print like all like this is what's going to happen and you're not prepared for it, right? Like all the things we were talking about earlier. And
Hmm.
I sort of jokingly say that this event is like all of the fine print. I'm like, let's go through this. This is what happens. This is what it looks like to lead yourself through this. This is what actually is going to come up for you. I don't want to romanticize it.
Hmm.
I think we could do that of like, just trust and surrender, like step into facilitation. And then we do it and we're like, fuck, this is scary. I can't do it. So this is very much like, no, let's go through the fine print together. Like this is gonna be scary and I'm gonna normalize it and I'm gonna tell you about how scared I am when I do this shit and like let's really create normalization around this so that you can actually build your capacity to step into this. And yeah, I just want to be as honest and clear as possible with people so that they can step in as consciously and intentionally into this work as they possibly can.
Yeah, I think that is why I love you, because you do that. And so many people don't, because they want to glamorize whatever it is they're offering people, right? Or
Sure.
maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not why. I can't speak for their intention, but they just don't mention it. And then it can feel so overwhelming and you're like, this isn't normal, but it is. So I so appreciate that and the way that you approach it. And I'll make sure that I link everything in the show notes. And yeah, I guess that's a good place to end. Is there anything that you'd like to share that you haven't gotten to or anything like that?
One thing that I will say is, because we're talking a lot about becoming liberated in your expression and learning how to transmit yourself into the world and integrate the people pleasing and all these little things that we do with others. But I just want to say, like, this idea that you need to be fully embodied and all of that, or you need to get to a place where you no longer engage any of these wounded relational patterns or like being if you want to become a facilitator in a method like this, you're going to have to be at some level of embodiment. I really want to like dismiss that entirely. I am not interested in this concept of like perfection. I think this is so common in especially like the new age world where we correlate embodiment with perfection and we get so obsessed with the idea of like ascension and like embodying our higher selves that we either dissociate from or desperately try to eradicate these very human parts of ourselves. And I will say, like, I really feel that I'm someone who's so connected to who I am and my essence. And I really feel like I transmit that into the world and into people. And people, my people, the people who are for me, feel it and they see it and they receive it. And I still have so many of my little wounded relational trauma patterns. And I still fall into that. And what this work for me is not about is like moving so far beyond that that we like don't even have that human experience anymore. What it's actually about is like learning to be with it, learning to be with the moment where me, Talitha, as the vocal awakening teacher who's so like connected to her voice, was like in a group of people and like, ah, I don't know what to say, or like, oh, I just like was fawning or people pleasing a little there. And like, that is everything. And that I can be with that in the moment and not make that mean anything about me and lead myself through it and hold space for the part of me that is going through that. And that I can also bring that vulnerability and humanness into my spaces, right? And not have to present as anything perfect. Like when we're talking about the voice and expression, it's so important that we strip away these new age and even like religious constructs of perfection because otherwise it's not authentic. And to me, authentic expression is like, I am with whatever is arising. And sometimes my channel is so clear and open and I'm so on my game and I'm so connected and expressed. And sometimes I'm not. And something comes up in my body from the past or gets triggered in a moment with a person. And that's there too. And that's a part of it. And can I authentically be with that? Can I be in the vulnerability of that moment and the imperfection and messiness of that moment? Can I build a capacity to like meet it as if that too is the sacred transmission, as if that too is just as important? And from that place, we actually start to let go of this sort of obsessive compulsive perfectionism that we can develop in the healing world that I was in really deep because I'm like, a recovering perfectionist. And what I'm talking about is actually what has really brought me out of that and allowed me to not hyperfixate on how much I'm healing or how much I'm doing or how much I'm embodied or how perfect or this or that. And has it allowed me to actually like find a sense of safety and peace in my own body. And that to me, I would say is the most important piece is like, don't come away from this conversation being like, oh, I have to get more aligned and opened in my voice so that, right? It's like, it's just you coming home to yourself, every single aspect of yourself and allowing all of them to be there and allowing all of them to have a voice.
Thank you for bringing that in. I feel like that closes everything in a really energetically clean way. So I appreciate you, Talitha, for coming on the second time because I totally bombed the first interview we had. It was my first one ever, and I was like a deer in headlights.
It was,
Um,
I think it was pretty great, but
I mean, because you were great. Like, you were great. I was like, uh, I don't. What the fuck is going on? Like, literally, how many times I was like, I don't know what the fuck to say. Um. So
First
thank you
pancake,
for,
right?
huh?
First pancake.
Exactly. Yep. First pancake's always gonna be shitty. I'm so
Wow.
glad that I didn't take that experience and run with it and be like, I just don't know how to interview people. Like, of course, your first time doing something is going to be really awkward and painful. And you're going to look back and be like, that sucked. But like, I'm glad I started because you evolve, you get better. So thank you for being here for the second time.
Thank you for having me. This is such a beautiful podcast and creative expression that you've birthed. Like really, it's amazing and I'm so honored to be a part of it and to be featured on it. So, thank you for having me. I really
Thank you for sharing your wisdom and
Mhm.
for supporting me. Really
Mhm.
appreciate you.
Absolutely. Always.